There was a phone call. On one end, the President of the United States, surrounded by generals, scientists. Silence. Every eye glued to the phone. Every breath held like a prayer. On the other, a young man. Hair a mess, shirt untucked, fingers ink-stained, eyes like they'd already seen the end of the world and made peace with it. "Yeah," he said. "It'll work. We built it right. If I survive, I'll explain." Then he laughed. It wasn't nervous. It wasn't heroic. It was the laugh of a man who had just seen God naked and found the whole thing kind of hilarious. He hung up, stepped outside into the dry New Mexico heat, lit a cigarette, and sat cross-legged in the dust. Behind him, one of the most powerful weapons ever built by man. In his lap, a pair of bongo drums. He started playing. Inside the base, grown men were pacing, sweating. A few whispered Hail Marys. Some double-checked numbers they'd checked 20 times already. He played. They thought he was losing his mind. He wasn't. He was the only one who fully understood what was coming, and refused to lie to himself about it. The test was codenamed Trinity, a bomb unlike anything the planet had seen. Scientists cried when they realized it worked. Some vomited, one collapsed. Feynman smiled, not because it was beautiful, not because it was right, because it was true. Truth, when stripped of illusion, looks like madness, and that's what he'd always chased. His name was Richard Feynman. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a prophet. He didn't want your medals. He wanted the raw data. He didn't worship power. He didn't bow to titles. He built a machine that could erase cities, and then went home to teach kids about magnets. This was the guy who cracked military safes for fun, not to steal secrets, but to prove that the people running the world had no idea how locks worked. The guy who answered "I don't know" louder than most people say "I do." The guy who thought religion asked the wrong questions, and most scientists gave the wrong answers. He didn't chase answers for comfort. He hunted them like wild animals. He asked questions until the room got uncomfortable, until the silence grew thick, until someone finally admitted, "I don't know either." Because to him, that was where it started. That was the ignition point of understanding. And when the answers finally came, he didn't cry. He didn't pray. He laughed. Because pretending not to laugh would have been dishonest. And dishonesty to him was the real enemy. That was the sound of a titan waking up, not with thunder, with laughter, in the middle of a desert, on the edge of annihilation. The others watched the countdown. He played drums. The others flinched when the sky exploded. He watched the light, eyes open, smiling, like a man who had just proved his theory and regretted none of it. Because this wasn't just science. It was reality, uncloaked, and he was the only one insane enough to dance with it. Before the bomb, before the chaos, before the whole world whispered his name in disbelief. There was just a kid, and a system that had no idea what the fuck to do with him. Pre-war America worshipped science like it was church. The professors were high priests, white coats were robes, equations were scripture, and God help you if you said, "I don't get it." In classrooms, doubt was sin. Questions were interruptions. If you didn't know something, you nodded and shut up. If you did, you used $10 words to make sure no one else understood. Intelligence wasn't about truth. It was about theater. And then came Richard. He wasn't a rebel. He wasn't even trying to be different. He just didn't buy the act. Skinny, Queen's accent, fidgety hands, zero patience for pomp. By 11, he was repairing busted radios for neighbors who were twice his size and half his IQ. He didn't read manuals. He didn't quote Maxwell. He'd tilt the radio, close his eyes, listen to the crackle, the hiss, the heartbeat of the machine. Then he'd pop it open, adjust a coil, flick the switch. Boom. Music. His explanation? I could kind of feel where the current didn't want to go. That was Richard. But Richard wasn't born in a vacuum. He had Melville. His dad didn't hand him facts. He handed him questions like matches. At 5, he'd ask, "Why does a ball roll?" And Melville would reply, "Wrong question. What makes it stop?" He didn't care if his son got the right answer. He cared if he kept asking after the answer. He read him encyclopedias like bedtime stories, but stopped before the good part, just to see if Richard would beg for the rest. He taught him how to think, not what to think. Then there was Lucille. Where Melville taught him logic, Lucille gave him flame. She made jokes during dinner prayers, called out snobs at PTA meetings, laughed the hardest when things went wrong. To her, life was a circus, and anyone who took it too seriously was just bad at clowning. Richard soaked it up. In his house, curiosity wasn't a hobby. It was air. And laughter wasn't escape. It was resistance. While other kids memorized the periodic table, Richard built his own lab in the basement. He'd take apart clocks just to see if he could put them back together before they noticed. He wired circuits that overloaded the house, burned through copper, scared the dog. Once, he made a magnetic contraption that made the kitchen lights flicker every time the fridge opened. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to figure out how the world was built, and that made him dangerous. Because the academic machine, it wasn't built for kids like him. It was built to polish sameness. It rewarded echo, not invention. Richard didn't echo. He asked why the equation looked ugly. He asked why the professor skipped that step. He asked what would happen if you just flipped the whole thing upside down. He wasn't from money, didn't wear the right shoes, didn't speak with the fake British accent some of the Ivy League kids faked for each other. But when he spoke, you listened, because under the twitching hands and crooked grin was something the system didn't know how to process. He actually understood, and he made the people pretending feel naked. That's why they didn't like him, not because he was wrong, because he was right, and didn't need their permission to prove it. Richard Feynman didn't enter science with reverence. He broke in through the side door, set off the alarm, rewired the fuse box, and asked, smiling, "Why the hell are you doing it that way?" By the time Feynman walked into Princeton, he was already a glitch in the system. Everyone else spoke in footnotes. He spoke in punchlines. They wore ties like armor. He wore rolled-up sleeves and a smirk. They quoted Newton and nodded solemnly. He quoted his mom and played bongos in the stairwell. He wasn't there to impress. He was there to think, loudly, messily, honestly. And he brought something with him the faculty couldn't categorize. Her name was Arlene. No degrees, no status, no future, just laughter in her eyes and death in her lungs. Tuberculosis, terminal. Everyone knew. Everyone told him not to marry her. Doctors, professors, his friends, even his own family. "You'll ruin your career. She'll hold you back. She's going to die," he said. So what? He married her anyway. On paper, it made no sense. But he didn't care about paper. He cared about her. She made fun of his formulas, called his blackboard that dusty girlfriend, said he looked hottest when he was mid-equation, and forgetting to blink. He'd read physics papers out loud to her in bed, and she'd interrupt. "Wait, you're telling me light is confused about whether it's a wave or a particle? Sounds like me trying to decide between chocolate or vanilla." He laughed every time. She made fun of his handwriting. He pretended to be offended. Once, when he tried to kiss her mid-problem, she said, "Finish the math first. Then you can have me." He was never more in love. But while he was solving the universe, her body was shutting down. One breath at a time. He started riding the night train after lectures, 2 hours there, 2 back, just to sit by her side for 15 minutes. He brought her strange gifts from labs, magnets, prisms, pieces of copper wire. Little scientific talismans like maybe, just maybe, they could hold her together. One night, in her hospital room, while she slept curled up in wires and pain, he sat beside her with a notebook. The nurse asked what he was doing. "Quantum," Electrodynamics, he said without looking up. Also trying not to fall apart. That was Richard. One eye on the edge of knowledge, the other on a dying girl who made his whole world feel alive. His professors didn't get it. One of them cornered him in the hall. "You're wasting your brilliance on sentimentality." Feynman didn't answer. He didn't need to. He just kept showing up, until the day she didn't. She died on a Thursday. No big final moment. Just gone. He didn't scream, didn't collapse, just walked out of the hospital, got on the train, went back to campus, and started writing. Letters. To her. Page after page. Days. Months. Years. He wrote about his lectures, his meals, the thoughts that wouldn't shut up. He made bad jokes, told her about annoying colleagues. One letter said, "You would have loved watching me destroy this pompous idiot in seminar today." Another ended, "I miss you when I breathe." No one knew he was writing them. He didn't show them to anyone. Until the last one. It ended with, "Now I must stop, because you can no longer answer." He folded it, put it in the drawer, and left it there. No drama, no sobbing, no Hollywood breakdown. But from that point forward, something in him was sealed. He didn't stop thinking. He stopped letting it show. He didn't cry. He calculated. He didn't scream. He solved. Love had been the one variable he couldn't isolate, couldn't measure, couldn't protect. And now it was gone. So he did the only thing he could do when life stopped making sense. He went deeper, into logic, into numbers, into silence. Los Alamos wasn't a lab. It was a paradox in the desert, a secret city built by paranoia and genius designed to summon fire from math. The mission was simple: build a bomb that would terrify Hitler. The reality was anything but. Barbed wire, censored mail, guards with rifles standing outside classrooms, brilliant scientists herded like livestock, their names stripped from mailboxes, their theories stamped top secret. Everyone wore a badge. Everyone watched their back. And then Feynman walked in, badge crooked, toolbox in hand, bongo drums under his arm. No salute, no deference. Just a grin, like he already knew the punchline to the universe's worst joke. The military brass didn't know what to do with him. He called generals by their first names. He skipped meetings if they bored him. He openly mocked the security protocols during lunch. At one point, a colonel barked at him for accessing a locked room without clearance. Feynman replied, "It wasn't locked. It was poorly designed. There's a difference." He was supposed to focus on physics. Instead, he started cracking their safes. Literally. He learned the lock mechanisms, studied their wear, figured out the combos using logic, statistics, and boredom. One day, he opened Oppenheimer's personal file cabinet and left a handwritten note inside. Guess who? Another time, he unlocked a vault storing nuclear data, rearranged the folders, and left behind. Try harder. The military panicked. They thought it was espionage. He thought it was hilarious. His logic: if I can break into this, imagine what an actual spy could do. They didn't know whether to fire him or promote him, so they let him keep going, nervously, eyes twitching, while he tore through physics problems in the margins of maps and memos. He did math on receipts, napkins, bathroom stalls. Once, at a local bar that doubled as a strip club, he solved a key diffusion equation while a dancer twirled next to him. He didn't look up. He was in flow. He treated the Manhattan Project like a puzzle, not a war machine. Until Trinity. The test, July 16th, 1945. Pre-dawn, windless, silent. They told everyone to get into bunkers. Feynman refused. He found an old truck, climbed into the bed, borrowed a pair of welding goggles, and sat there, alone, eyes fixed on the horizon. Someone asked if he was scared. He shrugged. What's the point of building the damn thing if you're not going to watch it work? Seconds before detonation, he thought about Arlene, about her laugh, her eyes, and whether she would have called this moment brilliant or batshit. Then came the light. It didn't explode. It arrived, like a second sun, born in silence. The desert turned white. The sky pulsed. The air slammed against his chest like it wanted to rip his atoms apart. Everyone else ducked. Feynman smiled, not because it was beautiful, not because he liked it, but because it worked. He sat still, goggles reflecting the end of everything, like he'd just watched the most complicated equation of his life solve itself. Later he said, "I didn't think about death. I thought about accuracy. No applause, no cheers, just the low hum of history tilting on its axis. He had calculated hell, and hell had shown up on time. Back at base, people shook. Some cried. One vomited. Feynman just walked to the cafeteria, got coffee and sat alone, staring at nothing. No one dared interrupt. He wasn't proud. He wasn't ashamed. He was quiet, because he finally understood what it meant to see too much. After the bomb, after the fireball, after the champagne toasts in rooms full of men who would never see the light he saw, Feynman walked away. No medals, no memoirs, no speeches, just a quiet exit. They offered him honors, titles, full professorships with names on the doors and parking spots with gold plates. He turned them down flat. When someone from Stockholm called about a Nobel nomination, he said, "I already had the fun. Why would I want the ceremony?" They thought he was being modest. He wasn't. He was being honest, because deep down, Feynman didn't trust anything that felt too polished, too neat. The war had taught him that brilliant men can rationalize anything, even hell. He'd helped design something that turned cities to shadows, and when it worked, when it really worked, he didn't feel pride. He felt sick, not because he doubted the physics, because he didn't doubt it at all. That scared him. It made him question every other truth he'd taken for granted. So he built a new religion. One rule: no gods. You don't have to know, but you have to be honest, not just in labs, in life. He refused to bluff his way through a question, refused to nod when he was lost, refused to pretend just to keep the peace. Once, during a seminar, a tenured professor made a sweeping claim about a theory Feynman knew was shaky. No one challenged him. Feynman raised his hand. "Excuse me," he said. "That sounds like horse shit." The room went silent. The professor tried to backpedal. Feynman didn't let him. He dissected the man's logic with surgical precision. No anger, no ego, just relentless clarity. The man left early. Feynman stayed late, helping a student in the back row understand a basic concept he'd been too embarrassed to admit he didn't get. That was the code. Don't fake it. Don't fear it. Don't fuck with the truth. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. He didn't care who you were, your degrees, your citations, your trophies on the wall. If your ideas were lazy, he'd tear them apart, with a smile. But it wasn't cruelty. It was a kind of mercy, because he expected the same thing in return. He wanted to be challenged, to be wrong, to learn. He said once, "Science is the belief in the ignorance of experts." And he meant it, because he'd seen what experts could build when no one asked enough questions, and he wasn't about to be part of that again. So he made honesty his armor. Not moral honesty, intellectual honesty. The kind that makes you admit, out loud, when you don't get it. The kind that keeps you awake because the numbers don't line up. The kind that burns bridges with colleagues who mistake confidence for competence. He lost jobs over it, lost friends over it, didn't blink. He said, "If you build a wall between yourself and reality, eventually reality will break through, and it won't knock." So he did the knocking first, over and over, until his knuckles bled, and even then he kept knocking, because to Feynman, pretending was poison, and the world was already full of enough people dying from that. Most professors walked into lecture halls like undertakers. Feynman walked in like a rock star who forgot to zip his fly and didn't give a damn. He didn't lecture. He performed. He didn't recite Maxwell. He provoked. He didn't arrive with reverence. He showed up with chalk in one hand and chaos in the other. The moment he entered, rooms shifted. Students sat up. Tension flickered. They didn't know whether they were about to learn quantum physics or get roasted for not knowing the difference between a wave and a wiggle. And usually, it was both. He once walked into class 5 minutes late, dropped his bag, picked up a piece of chalk, and said, "Today, I want to explain why magnets don't suck." Then he laughed. Nobody moved. He turned to the board, drew a sloppy diagram, paused halfway, looked back at the class, and said, "Wait, do any of you actually care why? Or are you just scared to look stupid?" A few students laughed. One girl in the front raised her hand. He gave her the chalk. She tried. She failed. He clapped like she just solved string theory. That was the point. He didn't want you to get it right. He wanted you to get it real. And once he had you, once the fear broke and curiosity took over, he went in for the kill. He explained quantum mechanics using Jell-O, taught particle theory using drunk-walking analogies, told a student once, "If you can't explain it to a waitress, you don't understand it." He could spend 40 minutes tearing apart your worldview, and you'd thank him for it after. One student wrote in their journal, "He made physics feel like punk rock, and I didn't even like physics before." Another, "Every time I walked out of his class, I wanted to call my dad and tell him the world made sense. But in a way, it never had before." That was Feynman. He once stormed out of a faculty meeting because someone used the phrase epistemological framework without being able to define it. He stood up, banged his bongo on the table, and said, "You people are allergic to clarity," then left. They called him difficult. He called them boring. One time, at a prestigious international conference, after 8 hours of dry PowerPoints and desperate applause, Feynman stepped on stage with no slides, no notes. He told the room, "You're making physics look like accounting," then spent 10 minutes free-speaking the most elegant dismantling of a mainstream quantum interpretation anyone had ever heard. Half the room stared in awe, the other half in fury. He finished with, "Anyway, that's what I think, but maybe I'm full of shit." Dropped the mic, walked out before Q&A. That was his pedagogy. Make you laugh, make you think, then make you realize you've been thinking wrong your whole life. Students worshipped him, not because he made things easier, because he made them real. He never treated them like vessels to be filled. He treated them like mines to be set on fire. And when they burned, oh, did they burn bright. He once said, "The joy of finding things out is better than being right." He wasn't humble. He was hungry. He played bongos in his office between derivations. He flirted with grad students and string theory. He picked locks on classroom doors just to prove he could. But at night, when no one watched, he poured beer, put on some jazz, and sat at his desk scribbling out entire new frameworks for visualizing quantum electrodynamics. Because beneath all the jokes, all the rhythm, all the rebellion, was a brain that refused to let the universe off the hook. He didn't repeat Tara. He tested it, every day, every moment. And when something exploded, he took notes. It was supposed to be a celebration. The Challenger launch had been packaged for maximum pride. Kids watching from classrooms, flags waving, teachers on board, cameras locked in, a country looking up. 73 seconds in, everything fell apart. Fireball, smoke, 7 dead. No warning, no survivors. Just stunned silence. NASA moved fast. Not to explain, to protect. Press conferences full of polished phrases. Engineers avoided eye contact. Executives smiled like nothing happened. The commission formed. Names were picked. Suits were fitted. And then, for some reason, they called Feynman. Maybe they thought he'd show up, say something clever, and leave. Maybe they thought he still played nice. They forgot who he was. He came in quietly, took his seat, started listening, and immediately smelled bullshit. The numbers didn't add up. The language didn't track. The official reports danced around the cause like it was radioactive. He didn't trust the suits. So he found the workers. The real engineers. The hands-on people. The ones who bled for the machines. And every single one of them said the same thing. The O-rings, rubber seals, meant to stay flexible. But when they got cold, they turned to glass. That morning had been one of the coldest on record. The engineers warned management. Management shrugged. It wasn't catastrophic. It was acceptable risk. Feynman didn't scream. He investigated. Quiet. Relentless. He brought notes, sketches, questions no one wanted asked. And then, on national television, he brought a prop. A piece of the same O-ring rubber used on Challenger, and a glass of ice water. The room didn't know what he was doing. He barely explained. He just talked, lightly, about cold, and rubber, and behavior under stress. And while the cameras rolled, he dunked the strip of rubber in the water, let it soak, talked a little more, calm, precise. Then took it out, bent it. It snapped. A tiny sound, sharp, final. He held it up, looked across the room. "This is why they died," he said. Silence. No gasps, no applause, just faces going pale. A general looked down. An executive shifted in his chair. One official physically turned away. Nobody interrupted, because there was nothing to say. The problem wasn't just technical. It was moral. Feynman had just proven, on live TV, that the launch shouldn't have happened. And everyone in that room had either ignored it or helped cover it up. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He didn't grandstand. He simply refused to lie. And the cost came fast. Behind closed doors, they thanked him for his passion, then whispered that he was disruptive, then stopped inviting him to meetings. He was removed, quietly, elegantly, like a stain someone tries to dab out of a uniform. He didn't care. He hadn't joined the commission to make friends. He'd joined because the truth had a body count. Afterward, someone asked if he felt vindicated. He said, "I feel tired. Because this wasn't triumph. It was just damage, control. Because the people in charge weren't sorry the shuttle exploded. They were sorry it made them look bad." He'd stared into the heart of institutional cowardice and realized something. He couldn't unsee it. And more than that, he couldn't go back to pretending, not even politely, not even to save face. He wrote later, "For a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled." He meant it. He always had. And for telling that truth, clearly, coldly, without spin, he paid the price. But he never flinched. Because some people lie to stay comfortable. Feynman told the truth to stay human. Years after he died, Feynman was still talking, not through marble statues or dimly lit museums, but through glitchy VHS tapes, scanned lecture notes, low-res YouTube uploads that look like they were filmed on microwaves, and yet somehow feel more alive than anything shot in 4K. You sit down, press play, and within 10 seconds, it's like someone just kicked open the door to your brain. Not yelling, not preaching. Just this impatient, grinning voice saying, "Hey, want to know something weird?" He didn't lecture. He invited you in. His lectures weren't lessons. They were dares. To think harder. To laugh louder. To stop pretending you understood when you didn't. He asked, "Why do magnets repel?" And before you could feel smart for remembering high school physics, he'd hit you with, "Actually, that's the wrong question." Then flip the entire thing inside out, joke about his own confusion, and leave you blinking at the screen like you just got mugged by logic and enjoyed it. A high school teacher once said, "I play his videos for my worst students. They laugh. Then they ask questions. Then they stop being my worst students." A YouTube commenter wrote, "Feynman is like if Einstein had ADHD and a drum set." Another said, "He's the only scientist that ever made me want to become one." He didn't make people feel dumb. He made them feel curious. Like curiosity wasn't just allowed, it was mandatory. And for anyone who'd ever sat in a classroom and felt like an idiot, for everyone who asked the wrong question and got laughed at, Feynman was a lifeline. He wasn't the teacher. He was the older brother who skipped grades and still helped you with homework, cursing the whole time, but never letting you quit. He didn't make you feel small. He made ignorance feel fixable. He said, "The first principle is that you must not fool yourself. And you are the easiest person to fool." And suddenly, not knowing wasn't shameful. It was the starting point. His blackboard wasn't an altar. It was a sandbox. No robes, no Latin. Just chalk dust, laughter, and that fire in your head when something finally clicks. He became the patron saint of people who never felt smart enough, but wanted to be. He wasn't an icon. He was a permission slip. To be messy, to be wrong, to try anyway. Even now, his fingerprints are everywhere. In the way Neil deGrasse Tyson raises an eyebrow when he simplifies the cosmos. In how Randall Munroe draws physics comics with stick figures. In how Veritasium frames every question as an itch that won't go away. They're not copying Feynman. They're carrying him. Because he didn't leave behind an institution. He left a method. One built not on certainty, but on wonder. Not on answers, but on better questions. That's his legacy. Not the bomb. Not the Nobel. Not the chalkboard. The moment when someone hears him ask, "Isn't this weird?" and suddenly realizes, yeah, it is weird. And it's beautiful. And now I want to know why. Feynman didn't write a manifesto. No guidebooks, no podcasts. No 10 steps to being a genius. But if you watched him long enough, really watched, you could start to decode it. Not rules, reflexes, hard-earned, blood-tested. There were only 3. Rule 1. If you don't know, don't pretend. Conference, packed room, air thick with ego. A panel of Nobel laureates circles around a convoluted theory. Nobody really understands it. But everyone nods, afraid to look dumb. Feynman raises his hand. "I don't get it." Silence. Shuffling. Someone tries to brush it off with jargon. He interrupts. "No, I really don't get it. Say it again, this time like I'm not wearing a tweed jacket." They hated him for that. Because he called their bluff. Because he'd rather look stupid than be fake. He knew exactly where pretending led. To broken bridges, to exploded shuttles, to people nodding their way into disaster. He didn't just avoid pretending, he attacked it. He once walked out of a faculty meeting, mid-sentence when a senior physicist tried to fake an explanation with flair instead of facts. Later, someone asked, "Why'd you leave?" He shrugged. "I got bored of the play." Rule 2. If it scares you, ask. Los Alamos. A colonel throws out a plan to detonate early. No questions allowed. Clock is ticking. Feynman raises a hand. What happens to the radiation drift if the wind shifts northeast? The room freezes. The colonel glares. That's classified. Feynman doesn't lower his hand. Yeah, but is it still lethal if it hits the test camp? The answer comes later, in a quiet hallway, whispered and grim. He asked anyway. Because fear is where lies live, and questions are the only weapon that works in the dark. He even questioned himself, brutally. Why do I keep writing Arlene? Why do I still laugh about the bomb? Questions don't heal, but they open the wound wide enough for truth to get in. Rule 3. If it makes you laugh, don't apologize. Funeral, Arlene's, black suits, tight faces. Someone tries to give him a sympathetic hug. Feynman steps back, mimics the guy's sad voice. She was a light in all our lives. Then snorts. She hated that kind of crap. People stare like he farted during prayer. He walks away, whispering to himself, she would have laughed at that. And she would have, because the thing about Richard, he didn't laugh to be cute. He laughed like it was a survival mechanism, like it was the last light left on in the building. One night, mid-lecture, a student asked him, "Isn't it wrong to joke about death?" Feynman blinked. "Why? You think death gives a shit?" Then grinned. "If I'm gonna go, I want to hear the punchline first." He didn't care if it made others uncomfortable. He cared if it made him dishonest. Because silence in the face of absurdity, that's the real profanity. His laughter wasn't joy. It was defiance. It was a warning shot against all the lies the world tells to keep people quiet. That's what made these 3 rules matter. Not because they were wise, but because they were reflexive. He lived them like instincts. They weren't stitched on a pillow. They were carved into his nervous system. If you don't know, don't pretend. If it scares you, ask. If it's funny, laugh. Even in front of generals, even in front of graves, even when it cost everything. Because honesty wasn't a virtue to Feynman. It was the only oxygen he trusted. And if it killed him, he'd leave a note. Cause of death. Faked nothing. If you've made it this far, something's already cracked. Not a grand revelation, not a Hollywood monologue, maybe just a flicker. A moment when he laughed, and it felt like he was laughing with you, or at you, or for you. Doesn't matter. What matters is, you felt it. Because this story, it wasn't about him. It was about you. And now, you're standing where he stood, not in a lab, not in Los Alamos, in front of a blank board, a piece of chalk in your hand, 1,000 voices behind you, waiting for you to say something clever. But the chalk doesn't care about clever. It wants truth. You hear yourself say, "I get it." Do you? You nod at meetings. You retweet smart shit. You quote people you've never really read. You fake it. Not because you're weak, but because it's easier, because fitting in is a hell of a drug. But now, there's this itch, right behind the eyes, like a fuse waiting to burn. Not because you want to be a genius, but because you're sick of pretending you know what the fuck you're doing. Because maybe, deep down, you've got your own questions. Why am I stuck? Why do I smile through bullshit? Why do I say fine when I want to scream? That's the mirror. That's the moment. You, with chalk and silence. You're staring at a board that won't write itself. And the question isn't, do I have the answer? It's, do I have the nerve to ask what matters? To say, I don't know. I don't get it. I need to understand. To look smart people in the eye and say, run that by me again. Like I'm not afraid of you. Because that's where he lives now. Not in physics textbooks. Not in grainy footage. In the part of you that's done lying. He gave you one rule. The only rule. The first principle is, you must not fool yourself. And you are the easiest person to fool. That's not motivation. That's a fucking scalpel. And now you've got to decide. Do you keep nodding? Or do you lift the chalk and start writing your own question? You're not smarter now. But maybe, just maybe, you're finally honest. And that's enough. For now.